Hello everyone, I'm the Man at Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on two commanders with friends forever from the Stranger Things Secret Lair, Mike the Dungeon Master and Will the Wise. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. The best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. For just $1, patrons get early access to certain videos on YouTube. In fact, patrons got a chance to see this video earlier. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Mike is a 2/2 human for 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 white. For 2 generic and tapping, he can reanimate any of your creatures that died that turn. While this is a time-sensitive ability, it's still pretty amazing, considering that it's simultaneously a reanimation enabler as well as a combo engine, so even on his own, Mike is pretty powerful. However, Will is paired with Mike not just to give him access to black, but because Will is an amazing reanimation target. Will, a 1/2 human for 1 white and 1 black, has the potential of creating a bunch of clue tokens each time he leaves and enters the battlefield. Will is a very political card since opponents can choose to not get the clue tokens. If they don't, they lose a life and you create 1 less clue token. However, even if no one takes the offer and prefer to lose the life, you still create at least 1 clue, which is still useful. However, as it is apparent by this partnering, if you're able to consistently recur Will, if opponents lose the life each time Will is reanimated, they'll eventually die. So they might begrudgingly opt to accept the clue and give you more clues. However, since this is forced politics, it's not enough to kill off the table. Fortunately, this combination isn't the only one allowed by the synergy between these commanders. While it is possible to partner either of them with any of the other 5 legendary creatures with the Friends Forever ability, I chose these two because of the white-black-green reanimation deck possible with their partnering. Since Mike has to reanimate the creature, then we need ways of sacrificing them. A reusable sacrifice outlet is the first piece of the engine, so let's take a look at some of the best ones included in the deck. Altar of Dementia, Sadistic Hypnotist, and Mind Slash can all be reused since they don't require tapping. The first two are the better of the 3 since they're free, but even though Mind Slash requires 1 colorless mana to activate, the fact remains that these 3 sacrifice outlets are quite annoying since they disrupt opponents. Everyone knows how salty people get over being milled out, so what better than with Altar of Dementia, one of the best ones in the deck since it's free and can be activated at instant speed. Thanks to this, once we have an engine complete, we can win the game by milling out opponents, assuming they don't have any cards that get shuffled back into their library. Attrition is another amazing sacrifice outlet even if it requires 1 black mana to activate. Being able to start engines with just 1 black mana is already good enough if you're able to keep it going with the rest of the pieces. But even on its own, being able to consistently destroy a non-black creature multiple times around the turns is amazing enough as it is, even if you're killing off just a couple of creatures. Martyr's Cause and Circle of Despair are great responsive sacrifice outlets. They both do the same with the exception that the former is free and the latter costs 1 to activate. However, being able to protect a key creature from damage while sacrificing sacrifice fodder is just icing on the cake. They're much more useful than they appear. As a floor, they're a sacrifice outlet, but their ceiling is protecting you and your creatures from impending doom. Viscera Seer and Greater Good are both free, instant speed sacrifice outlets that help us with card advantage. While the Seer can only scry and not draw, at least it can filter our draws, which is pretty key since we want to be digging for our engine and combo pieces or responses. Greater Good is amazing card advantage even though we have to discard 3 cards after drawing, but that's fine as long as we've already assembled a game-ending combo. Perilous Forays help us accelerate further by ramping for any land with a basic land type. That includes dual lands, triomes, basics, and any utility land with a basic land type. 46% of the deck's lands have a basic land type, so this does some serious work, especially when used as a sacrifice outlet multiple times a turn. Fallen Ideal is another innocuous free instant speed sacrifice outlet. It can be used to pump the creature, particularly Mike, and believe it or not, can actually take out an opponent via commander damage in some games. What I love best about this aura is that it returns to your hand when it goes to the graveyard from the battlefield. So if the creature it's enchanting dies, or if it eats removal, you recover it. Amazing enchantment in general, but an even better sacrifice outlet. However, all of these sacrifice outlets pale in comparison to Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Mike needs 2 mana to activate, so what better way to give him that mana than by sacrificing the creature we want to recur in order to get the mana to do so. While these are the initial pieces of the engine, they're also one of the engine pieces that can help the engine go infinite. Same with Palm of Ullmark, Sifter of Skulls, and Pitiless Plunderer. While these creatures don't have built-in sacrifice outlet, they give us some form of mana whenever a non-token creature we control dies. So if we're sacrificing a non-token creature for free, these trigger, giving us a token that can be sacrificed for mana. Mana that can be used to activate Mike. Granted, we need 2 mana to activate Mike, but these do amazing work regardless. Having any 2 of them on the battlefield will do the trick of always giving us the mana needed to activate Mike. or any of these and Phyrexian Altar. That is enough to get us halfway to infinity, or just Ashnod's Altar. But how is it that we get to infinity? Well, the final piece of the engine, untapping enablers. Thornbite Staff, Hyrax Tower Scout, and Sparring Mummy all help untap Mike. The Scout and Mummy are amazing creatures to sacrifice because we can then use Mike to reanimate them right afterwards. Then when they enter the battlefield, they'll untap Mike. And thus, with enough mana, we can do it all over again. The way the staff works is by having it equipped to Mike and understanding how the stack works. So let's just quickly see how to use the staff with Mike and Will as an example. When you sacrifice Will, that triggers the staff, as well as Will. However, in response to the staff's trigger, activate Mike to reanimate Will. Then Will enters the battlefield and he triggers again. Will's enter the battlefield trigger resolves, then his leaves the battlefield trigger resolves, and then finally the staff's trigger resolves, untapping Mike. However, the best creature to pull this off isn't even Hyrax Tower Scout or Sparring Mummy. They're amazing and can still help go infinite. However, Village Bellringer and Great Oak Guardian do it better because they untap all of our creatures. So not only will they untap Mike when they enter the battlefield, but any mana dorks we might have, thus potentially getting us to infinity in that configuration as well. As a bonus, the Tree Folk gives our creatures +2/+2. So doing that infinitely many times will make our creatures infinity. So as long as any of them can get through, it's game over. However, even though these interactions are enough versatility to help us win the game with either milling out opponents or potentially dealing infinite combat damage, that's not nearly consistent enough for me. Time to see what these infinite engines are really for, and that's draining our opponents for infinite life. Corpse Knight, Poison Tip Archer, Sir Conrad the Grim, Vindictive Vampire, Zulaport Cutthroat, Bastion of Remembrance, and the Meathook Massacre each have all opponents lose 1 life whenever one of our creatures die. Well, Corpse Knight has them lose the life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, but since our engine is for indefinite reanimation, it's essentially the same thing for all effects and purposes. Once our engine is assembled, any of these cards is enough to end the game. However, even if we're not going infinite yet, we can still win by 1,000 cuts if we're constantly hitting the table for 1 life multiple times in a turn. The best thing about this engine and game-ending setup is that the deck has so many cards with similar effects that it's very difficult to disrupt. You just removed my Corpse Knight? Alright, Poison Tip Archer takes its place. Oh, you removed that? Okay, Sir Conrad takes its place, and so forth. Same with our free sacrifice outlets. Oh, you got rid of Greater Good? Okay, Viscera Seer takes its place. Got rid of that? Okay, I got Altar of Dementia. Got rid of that? Okay, Sadistic Hypnotist, I choose you. Did Sparring Mummy get exiled from a graveyard in response? Okay, let me use Hyrax Tower Scout. Did that get exiled too? Great Oak Guardian to the rescue. And these aren't even the only game enders either. Pious Evangel is also included. While this side of the card is incredibly useful since it has the potential to gain us a ton of life, once we're ready to end the game we can transform it to its other side by no other than sacrificing another permanent, which can even be a creature to get further value. Once it's transformed into Wayward Disciple, it can hit opponents for 1 life. The only downside is that it's only a target opponent and not the whole table. It's not a problem once we go infinite, but until then you can only really hurt the biggest threat on the table, and you're still gaining life. Radiant Solar is another potential game ender as well as advantage piece. The reason why Radiant Solar is so good here is that we venture into the dungeon each time a creature enters the battlefield. So each time Mike reanimates a creature, he's a true dungeon master because we're now venturing into a dungeon thanks to it. Lost Mine of Phandelver is the best dungeon to venture through multiple times with this deck. Obviously, venturing infinitely many times through the Dark Pool ends the game, but even before we can go infinite, venturing through this dungeon a bunch of times a turn around the table is still amazing. We scry 1, create a treasure token, which is useful for fueling Mike, drain the table for 1, and then draw a card. So not only will this end the game once we reach infinity, but before then it can still provide value no matter which room we venture through each time Mike reanimates a creature, or when we simply have a creature enter the battlefield. Just to show an example of the simplest setup possible for the engine, let's say we have Ashnod's Altar, Mike, Sparring Mummy, and Radiant Solar on the battlefield. We sacrifice the Mummy to the altar, getting 2 colorless mana. We use that to activate Mike, reanimating the Mummy. The Mummy enters the battlefield, untapping Mike and triggering the Angel. We then venture into Lost Mine of Phandelver. Since this is infinite, we can pass through the Dark Pool infinitely many times to drain the table. But along the way, we're also creating tokens and drawing cards. However, as I mentioned earlier, this engine has innumerable setups. This is just one example. In terms of some pieces giving our commanders even more mileage, Seedborn Muse and Academy Manufactor are included. The Muse might not take Mike to infinity, but at least we can use him each turn until we can. And more importantly, it untaps all of our permanents each untap step, so it's still an amazing card here. The Manufactor, one of my favorite cards in quite some time, is just so amazing here. Will is Clue Projection White in the command zone. Even if none of our opponents create clue tokens, we still get one. With the manufacturer, we'll then get that many treasure and food tokens as well. Since will triggers upon leaving and entering, even if no one made a clue, we'll still get 2 clues, 2 food, and more importantly, 2 treasures each time we sacrifice and reanimate will. So in that example we saw earlier with just Will, Altar of Dementia, and Mike equipped with Thornbite Staff, if we had a Calibre Manufacturer as well, then that's enough to go infinite. So we'll be able to mill out the table. So its floor value and its ceiling is game over. So this card is so good here. However, venturing through the Temple of Dumathoin in Lost Mine of Phandelver isn't the only way the deck draws cards off of its main engine. The Great Henge, Soul of the Harvest, and Guardian Project each draws a card whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control. So each time we're reanimating a creature or just playing a creature, we'll be able to draw a card. As a bonus, the Great Henge can also provide 2 green mana and 2 life for tapping, so it also doubles as a mana rock. Erebos Bleak-Hearted, Grim Haruspex, Harvester of Souls, Midnight Reaper, Dark Prophecy, Moldervine Reclamation, and Liliana Dreadhorde General also provide card advantage via our engine, but whenever a creature we control dies. Some of these only trigger if the creature were a non-token, but that doesn't matter since we're not reanimating tokens anyways. However, for those that don't care about the creatures being a token, sacrificing Eldrazi Spawn or Eldrazi Scion tokens draws us a card, which is just icing on the cake. We lose life from some of these, but we also gain life from some of them, so it could potentially balance out. Liliana is also just an amazing planeswalker in general for this deck since all of her abilities are relevant. Skull Clamp is another way of drawing cards off of our creatures dying. However, we need to pay 1 generic each time to equip it to the creature before we sacrifice it. It's still worth it since we're drawing 2 cards for potentially 1 mana each time. Suffice it to say that this deck draws into a ton of cards. So much so that Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are included in the deck. Either way, neither take up a slot in the deck, so it's not like it's wasteful to have them here, although they definitely pull their weight. Drawing cards isn't the only thing these engines can pull off either. Our shards takes advantage of all the times we're having creatures enter the battlefield. Each time they do, we can destroy an opponent's artifact or enchantment. We don't even need to go infinite to get the most out of this either. We can also just get rid of their creatures with more than just attrition as well. Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact, my favorite mono black enchantments, are obviously going to be included in a deck like this one. Are you kidding me? Do you know how easy it is to wipe the board thanks to these enchantments, especially in a deck like this one? Resolving any of these is easily the highlight of my existence whenever playing decks like this. The following cards in the deck are the essential card advantage, responses, and mana acceleration of any deck. While Mike can definitely help reanimate any creature that bid the dust to removal, he can't recover anything else. Fortunately, Eternal Witness does an amazing job of that. Each time it enters the battlefield, we can recover any card in our graveyard, so it's an amazing reanimation target to get back any non-creature card in our graveyard, or any creature we couldn't reanimate. Suffice it to say that this does some serious work here, but we'll see some of that work in a bit. Witch's Cottage also helps in recovering creatures, albeit to the top of a library if it enters untapped. If for some reason we couldn't reanimate the creature that turn, we can fetch for this with any of the swamp fetching lands in the deck or even with Perilous Forays. And most important of all, it doesn't take up a slot on the deck. As for protecting our board just in case someone were to wipe it in the worst moment possible, that's what Teferi's Protection, Heroic Intervention, and Flawless Maneuver are for. The best thing about having a Reanimator like Mike in the command zone is that when we add Eternal Witness to our engine, we can always essentially use Heroic Intervention every turn if we need to. Champion's Helm, Swiftfoot Boots, and Lightning Greaves are the ubiquitous protection pieces included in the deck since it does depend quite heavily on Mike. However, he's still just a 3-costed commander in a green deck, so it's not that difficult to recast him multiple times in a game. Dryad Arbor, Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, and Faber or Elder, the deck's mana dorks, not only help accelerate the deck but can also provide the mana necessary to help Mike reach infinity. If we had both the Arbor and Birds in play when we're sacrificing then reanimating Village Bell Ringer or a Great Oak Guardian, then we can go infinite. If we just had Bloom Tender or Faber or Elder, then they'd be enough since they'll tap for no less than 2 mana each, since Bloom Tender taps for green and white thanks to Mike. The best thing about Dryad Arbor is that it can be fetched for with not just the forest fetching lands and Perilous Forays, but with either Nature's Lore or 3 visits, 2/3 of my favorite ramp trifecta. These are an obvious include here with so many lands that have basic land types, so you can never go wrong with adding these to any multicolored deck that runs green. As for the rocks, Soul Ring and Mana Crypt are also a given. The deck has more dorks than rocks because we have ways of untapping them, but out of all of them, Mana Ramp is more reliable, especially since so many players refuse to run mass land destruction. Speaking of lands, Cabal Coffers and Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth help a ton with accelerating the deck since so many cards are black. Being able to generate a ton of black mana not only helps us cast all those spells we're casting, but can help us activate Mike many more times per turn if we're not at infinity yet. Yavimaya Cradle of Growth does something similar to Urborg. Unfortunately, Rafella's Llanowar Emissary is banned in Commander. Otherwise, he'd be a much cheaper Magus of the Coffer, but for green. Shame. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 9 fetch lands, all 3 dual lands, all 3 shock lands, all 3 opponent lands, Indatha Triome, Murmuring Bosk, Reflecting Pool, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 2 of each basic land. As with all of my deck techs, you don't have to run the more expensive mana sources like the dual lands, Mana Crypt, etc. if you don't already have them, won't proxy them, or aren't playing online. You can very easily swap them out for budget substitutes and the deck will still work just fine. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Mike and Will. While it's possible to partner Mike or Will with any of the other legendary creatures that have friends forever, I especially like this partnering because I love the reanimation archetype and all the things that are possible with it. From a purely reanimation perspective, I feel like Will is the best one to partner with Mike. You get access to black, plus you have a creature that triggers twice during reanimation, once when he dies and once again when returning. If you remember my Tormod and Sitter Kondo deck, then you already know of all the possibilities of constant reanimation with a white-black-green partner pairing. However, Mike and Will are way more synergistic together than Tormod and Sidar, even though they also work well together. I even like it more than the Nethroi Reanimator deck I built, even though that one's also a fun Reanimator deck in these colors. However, fun is in the eye of the beholder. So if you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Reanimator Kirby, and happy brewing.